window, we have the ability to drag over and place inside our variables pane. Um, and I'm going to place one or two here real quick. And what you would normally have to do, you can edit these steps. So what I did, these are all steps or Java beans. I drug them over and placed them into the flow or the call flow of the script. Now normally you have to right click on here and go to properties to actually set some of the properties. And if you look at here, there's a whole lot of input and output parameters that we'll talk about as I go through some of the later tutorials. But what you would normally have to do every single time you want to modify the properties is right click and go to properties. It's kind of annoying, but what that double click to customizers does is allows you to double click and bam, it opens up the output window here or the input output window where you can actually customize it, or the customization screen. So that's a very neat feature that not a lot of people know about. And okay, so a couple other things that I want to talk about here while we got the editor open before we even start scripting. I've already talked about the palette window, the design window, variable window, and message window. But essentially what I wanted to hit home is that all the steps that are over here are actually Java beans. And what you can do is you can actually drag them over into the design window, and you're actually creating the customized logic or the flow that your scripts will use. Now one thing you can do, I'll delete this additional step here. What you need to know about is wherever you have highlighted inside your design flow, whatever step is in dark blue is where the execution point is, or where your design point is right then and there. You'll actually see several things change here, but if you drag another step over and release it, it's always going to go below wherever the dark blue is highlighted. So what I just showed you is I had call subflow open and I drug a delay step over, and this is totally not a script that I would ever do in production, but just to let you know, it's always going to go below where the blue is. So if I go back up to start, I drag another step over and I place it. See how it went below start, which was highlighted blue, and now that is where the execution point is in the script. So it's a very important thing to know, because some people get frustrated in that when you drag the steps over, they don't go where you want them to. Don't worry about that. What you can do is, if you do mess up the path where you want the object to go, you can always drag up or down to reorder the steps inside the scripts. Basically what you're doing here is you're doing structured programming, where you're actually creating the flow and the logic for your script. That's all we're essentially doing. The folders over here, if you really want to get technical, are what they call jars, Java jars, which are basically like zip files that contain all your beans. If you're a good enough programmer, you can actually reverse engineer all of CRS. Everything is a custom jar that is not password protected for whatever reason, but you can, if you're good enough, go ahead and reverse engineer it. A couple other things to note, like I was talking about, you do need to customize some of your steps, so you can right click and go to properties. We can also cut it if we don't want that there. We can copy it if we want to basically clone it. We can delete it. We can do a find. I'll talk about some of the other steps that are down here in a little bit. We'll go to properties real quick. Essentially, when you go to the properties panel, what you're doing is you're setting input and output parameters that the step needs in order to execute during the script. These are what they call customizers. Basically, they define what parameters these steps need in order to execute. Every step that you'll drag over to the design window's customizers are actually different. So for example, if we look at the call subflow and we go to properties for this, you'll see a general tab, an input tab, and an output tab. Subflows are basically subroutines inside the script. If we look at, let's say, a set step, for example, and we drag that over here, a set step essentially is where you actually can set the value of a variable that might be used later on in your script. So if we go here and we go to properties on the set step, you'll notice that you only have the general tab and you have a variable and a value pane. I'll try to cover all the steps in detail and give you guys a real good explanation on what they do later on, but essentially that's all it is to it. One last thing is about the variable window down here. Your specific scripts are going to need variables at some point. So what I'd like to do is to show you guys how you add a new variable in. We can click on the add new icon down here, which looks like a down arrow. We have to select the type. So if you use the down arrow here, what this is these are programming types. So if you aren't familiar with programming, I'd recommend maybe going to Barnes & Noble, something like that, picking up like a Java, introductory Java book, J2 SE book. So integer is what int is, that's like a number, string is like, cat. float, long. These are things that most computer guys are somewhat savvy on. They may not know exactly what they mean. You will notice there are some types down here that are not Java specific types. For example, document is a CRS specific type variable, and so is grammar. These are things that Cisco has provided for us. Session, prompt, contact. These are things that we need to know how to use in order to interact with the IVR. So these aren't necessarily Java data types anymore. These are actually CRS proprietary types. So what I want to do is I want to create a new string here in the pane. So you can type the word string with a capital S because it gets ticked off if you do it with a lowercase s, or you can actually find string in the list here and actually select it that way. And I'll call this fname. And we'll talk about syntax and all that and naming conventions in a little while. And I actually want to set this value to Alex, which is my name. We'll talk about arrays and parameters and finals and all that in a later blog, but all we did was we basically created a variable called fname and we set it to the value of Alex. Now inside our script we may want to change that at some point during runtime.